Welcome to From Doubt to Destiny,
the podcast where dreams come alive. I'm Eden Ryder, the dream maker.
And I'm Stacie Trott, the queen maker. We're here to give your dreams the royal treatment that they deserve. Get ready to unlock your queen
and unleash her dreams.
Our producer does not want me to welcome you, but I want to welcome you again because I know in the audio you just heard, we welcomed you, but welcome back. I'm Stacie Trott and I'm here with my co-host,
Eden Ryder.
And we are here to have a conversation today about, I'm going to get that drum roll thing because I really just need it every time I want to introduce the topic. The topic today is marriage. And as of right now, the way I'd like to frame it is the mystery of marriage. And I think it is a very mysterious thing that you will not, and we could say the mystery of parenting, the mystery of fill in the blank, right? There's so many things that you think you know from the outside what it's like. And then when you get behind it, you discover things that you just could not know until you were actually in it. And then there's also so much to learn. There's mysteriousness to it. So the mystery of marriage is the topic today. And I think we're going to end up probably, I'll just say right up front, probably having to come back and do a second part on it because there's so much we could talk about on this topic. So every conversation, we like to have some structure to it. And the structure is we are going to have a topic, which I just gave you. We're going to discuss the tension. Oh my gosh. The hope is that we don't stay in the tension and we are able to go to the takeaways and the transformational thoughts, which are some transformational thinking that definitely I have some I've learned and discovered on this topic, but then also some takeaways, things that you can practically apply, calls to action in your life. So let's start with the tension in the topic of the mystery of marriage. So when Eden and I were prepping for this, one of the things I was saying to her is I had a very interesting experience. And if I didn't know anyone else who had, I probably would just think it was unique. But unfortunately, I know several women who have gotten married and in the very beginnings of it faced many challenges or significantly challenging things that completely rattled them in the thinking of like, this is not what I thought I was getting, what I signed up for. I thought I was marrying my best friend and we were just going to continue enjoying each other's time. And the way we were dating, it was just going to be like, now I never have to wonder what the level of commitment is because now we're committed and it's just going to, what we were doing before is just going to continue, hoping it was pleasant before you got married. And I unfortunately know too many examples and stories of where that is not the experience that people have. So I just right up front wanted to say at the very beginning on the other side of I do, if you're listening to this and you had a very bumpy experience or you are having a bumpy experience, know that that is, it's not obviously God's design, but it can happen. And I think it happens more often than we know and that we are aware of because I don't think it's spoken of. And I think one of the reasons why it's not spoken about is because when it's happening to you, you don't know that it's happening to others, that it has happened to others. And so you can be extremely isolated in the post-nuptial experience that is supposed to be the next step. They tell you is you're in this honeymoon experience when you're just on this heightened euphoria around this amazing experience that you just had and are continuing. And that was not my experience. And unfortunately, I know too many women where that was not their experience. And so if you are having that or you had that, know that that's not unique. You're not alone. And hopefully you've gotten help or getting help. And I encourage you as you go through this journey, I want to talk about all the things connected to the mysteries of marriage, that as you get healing, that you share what you've learned so that you can help someone else who is in an isolated place thinking that she is having a unique experience and that she has messed up her life or he has messed up his life. That is not necessarily the case, but there's a lot of help being a bridge and sharing your testimony. So just wanted to start there because that can kind of be like, it's like getting up in the air in an airplane and you're thinking, oh, let me relax. And then all of a sudden you're in turbulence and you're like, oh no. And it's the beginning of a 14-hour flight. And you're like, oh no, I don't think I'm going to make it if it's starting out this turbulent. That's the thing. It can happen. Eden, on the other hand, did not have turbulence post-marriage. She had a lot of turbulence pre-marriage. So it can happen on either side, but most people that have the level of turbulence you typically had are like, nope, ain't for me. But you guys worked through it, and it's amazing that you did and you got here. But so what would you want to say at the beginnings of the mystery of marriage?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, I'll preface by saying I feel like I'm like the amateur in this conversation, so I'm by no means going to act like an expert here. I am freshly celebrating 2 years, proudly,
Whoa.
but that,
Only 2 years? Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
It's so
Yeah.
funny. We're telling a friend, they're like, good Lord, we feel like you guys have been together for like
You packed a
ever.
lot into those 2 years,
That's
so
what
it
she was
definitely
saying
feels
too.
longer. Yeah. Mhm.
um,
Okay.
yeah, so not going to say I'm an expert, very much in it. And yes, however, what I've learned, and I think I'm very grateful for, I think I had a lot of reframing and like realizations before we got married of,
Mhm.
I guess, the idea of like expectations of what were like kind of painted the picture of what marriage is, which I think it's very, I'll speak for girls and not all girls, but like like very like, I don't know, you grow up with like Disney princesses and like this man
Mhm.
comes and saves you and
Prince
like,
Charming that rides in on a horse.
yeah, and
Mhm.
then even that, like I was very into like rom-coms and like all of
Mhm.
these, I don't, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
where it's
Yeah,
just
yeah, totally.
so like
The
I d-
fluffy, girly, pink,
yeah,
pretty image of girl meets boy, they fall in love, they get
not like the
married, and
romantic
together.
gestures and
Yeah.
like these
Mhm.
big, huge, grand moments. And so it's interesting. I had that one hand, and then I did come from divorce, but in the same
Mhm.
breath, I came from divorce, but then both my parents got remarried, and I have also very stable, like, I have aunts and uncles, and like
Mhm.
my uncles that married into the family, they've never not been there. So I have just a lot of
Yeah.
strong marriages specifically in my family. So even though I
Yeah.
came from divorce, I always knew I wanted it, and I always had very high expectations for it, and I knew it's
Mhm.
something, yes, I didn't want to screw up. However, I just think expectations, the mystery of it is like the expectations you come in with, that realizing that two people can have very different expectations, and a lot of times they're not communicated. So I think people
Wait, let's
jump,
pause right there one
yeah,
second. You said expectations. I want to say unmet expectations, right? Because that's
yes.
exactly what you're saying. And I think I heard someone say once disappointment comes from unmet expectations. So there's like you're setting up for like these huge things and then uncommunicated, you're gonna crash with
Yeah.
uncommunicated expectations equals unmet expectations equals disappointment. So go ahead. That's what you were thinking.
Yeah. So
All
I
these
think
expectations.
all these expectations. So I think what was a blessing in disguise was a lot of the turbulence that we went through in the beginning forced a lot of uncomfortable conversations. And it also got to a point of like when we started like approaching the idea of marriage and talking about marriage, like even though it was something I always desired, it became real with who is now my husband. And also I think it started breaking down this like fairy tale image I had of relationships, but not in a negative way. Like I don't want to be like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, it
yeah.
shattered it and like all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But I mean in like
Yeah,
an
yeah.
amazing way of like this person is your partner, your best friend, like your person. So it just made me think about how like society portrays marriage. And I'm not going to say like how it's meant by like God or like whatever that. I just mean more like society wise and
Imagery we get.
imagery. And even honestly, the idea of like a wedding, which is interesting because I always was like, I want this like huge wedding and all of the stops. But the more living and actually having this experience with a person, which this is the first time I think actually it was like because of this person I wanted to get married versus
I want the wedding and
I
I'm
want the
looking for the
wedding and
actor
or I
who's
want the
gonna play the
husband, I want
husband.
the kid, and where it was more like insert groom, where this is the first time it was like the human in front of me is the reason why I want to get married. So I
You said
remember
that
having,
earlier. Insert. You were
yeah,
like, this is what I want, and then I'm looking for the actor who's going to play that role.
exactly. Yes, where this is the first time it's like because of who this person is, I now want to get married. And I guess the biggest realization I had was this whole idea of a wedding, the whole idea, honestly, even the pressure on a man of like, you need to have like all your SHIT together, like have X amount of
Right.
money saved and get
Yeah.
me like this 2 carat diamond and then pay for a wedding that's going to put us into debt. And like all of that stuff where I was like, wait a second. I'm like, I want someone who wants to be with me, like the whole idea is you're saying like through like the good and the bad, like all of these times, but you're setting it up where you're like, I need these pristine perfect conditions before we even approach this. So it
Yep.
started like occurring to me, I'm like, this makes no sense. So like I'm waiting again to feel like I'm waiting to start my life until like financially we're both like in this amazing place. So we're basically saying like we need to be both perfect versions of ourselves before we even step into this together. And it just started like, I don't know, like it wasn't adding up in my mind of like, I just had this realization of like, we're being taught this, but then told, but once you're in marriage, like stick it out through everything. Where I'm like, well, then why aren't those the expectations coming into it? Like, why do we need to be in a perfect moment to get married? So it just kind of flipped on its head. It happened to because of everything going on where I'm like, we're committing to each other. We've seen some of the ugly on both of our ends. Like we've seen our like quote unquote potential. We know like we want to grow together. Like I'm seeing all of the things that are necessary for me to trust this man completely and like want to do life with him. So why am I going to ask for like this further iteration of him to even start our lives together and vice versa? Like, let's do this now. Like if I want a bigger ring down the line or if I want like a bigger wedding down the line, let's do it then. Like, why am I, like waiting? So I think we had a lot of those. We cleared up, I think, some expectations. And I think also I grew a lot and like completely reframed my idea of marriage and what I wanted from it early on. So that's again, I'm only 2 years in, but I think,
No, you're telling your story that people need to hear because some people have. You and I had a conversation where we went to lunch, and at the lunch, which I thought we were just getting together. I don't know if you were already thinking about this or were you thinking about it before because you're a
I don't
thinker and a planner. You might have been like, we're going to get together. I want to talk about this. But we were having a
don't
life
remember.
changing conversation, I think, for you that I didn't know we were having.
Yeah.
And part of that conversation was like, I know this is everything you just said. This is my person. I want to get married, but he's supposed to have all this money to buy me this big ring and propose, and we have to have a big wedding. And so all the big stuff we don't have like lined up, but I'm ready. So what do I do when like the dream isn't matching what the reality is, but it feels like it's time? And I'm like, first of all, that's no one actually, not too many people actually have that. Even when you see it, even at the celebrity level, you see these mega things and then you see so-and-so is getting divorced. And it's like, wait a minute. They had all the money. They had the beauty. They had the fame. Why is it not working? And it's like, because it's not what it looks like. And so that image that I think you were like, it's supposed to be this. I was like, that's not a thing. I don't know anybody that actually has that thing. And I was like, what if you actually just do it based on where you are and you do it together? And instead of waiting for him to propose, you decide, are we going to get married? Do we want to be in the next step and phase? And if the answer is yes, go and look at rings together. And I think I even said, go get a card, both of your names, and buy the rings together. Like, it's not about he's got to go spend, a year's salary on a ring for you. When you look at the history of where the whole thing of like the woman's supposed to get a diamond, it was like the diamond industry trying to market their products, and it hit. They had a marketing idea, it hit. Now we all think we need to have these beautiful big rings in order to say yes to the commitment, which doesn't make any sense, but we've been programmed to believe that. I see a theme in conversations that we're having that you find yourself programming, and then you look at and you match the programming with what you want, and you go, the programming isn't matching the reality of my experience. And I feel like I'm going to have to switch what the programming is telling me because I want to do this and it's not matching up. That's like a theme for you.
Yeah.
Would you say that's right?
Absolutely.
Challenging the programming. when it's just not matching up. So I would say that's actually something, if anyone's listening, just even generally on this topic of marriage, if your programming or the programming you've received is not matching the reality of what your experience is, kick that programming down because it's not real. And it can keep you from actually seeing the person that God has for you and the season that you're in. It's like, it feels like it's time, but it's not matching the image in the picture. Annihilate the picture, get rid of that, the programming, and say, does it feel like this is the person? Do I have the boxes checked? And when you went through, is this my person? You were like, yeah. Really cool that you decided to do the thing, even though, and the choices that you made, from the rings you picked to the wedding that you had. I mean, I'm biased, but it all, I don't think it could have been more appropriate for you guys, as far as the beauty of it, and the authenticity of, I have, when you call me, one of your wedding pictures is what I have saved for your picture on my phone. And it was just a beautiful expression of a commitment to be committed to each other. So I love that phrase. It's how I define marriage. It's a commitment to be committed. But what would you say in respect of, you had what was considered, I think in your mind at the time, an atypical experience, but I would dare to say you had a much more typical experience than what, the social media worlds and the space that we live in, the programming says, but yours was more typical and just not talked about. Did you find that to be the case after the fact? And kind of I remember we were sitting at the table and you said, well, I do have a friend where she told me that. She was like, dude, it's now or it's not. What, right? Am I saying that story right? You were like,
Yes.
there was
Oh my
somebody.
gosh.
Yeah.
Once I started talking about it, I realized so many women who had been married for like a significant amount of time, they're like, are you kidding me? Like, I basically told them, like, we're getting married now, or like, I'm done with this. So I was like, really? Like, you just, she was like, actually, you want to know what? You went and bought rings? And she was like, you know what? I'm just wearing it now. Like, you don't have to propose to me. So she's like, I walked out with the ring on my finger. She was like, yeah, like, it's not that
It's
serious.
not what's in the rom-coms, but it is really what the reality is. The experience is just very different than, I think, the picture and the imagery that we're sold. And I hope that us just even having this transparent conversation about that, opens up the space for someone who's like, well, I feel like right person, right time, but the details for the imagery isn't matching up. So hopefully we're freeing somebody from the reality of what that they think that looks like.
And I will say, because again, we just celebrated like a 2-year anniversary. My husband asked me, he was like, now like that we're like financially in such a different place, like, would you do it differently? And I was like, you want to know what? Like, no, I'm like maybe be having the opportunity to invite more people because it felt
Mhm.
limited to a certain extent there, but we would have outgrown the venue. And I'm like, even the venue, I'm like, it means so much to me that where we went. So I was like, I
Yeah.
loved having it there. So I was like, no, I think I would now like want at some point to like be able to go on vacation with a lot of people and like invite them all there. But I was
Which
like,
is
I
actually
actually,
overrated too. We could talk about that offline. But the whole idea of having a vacation with all your family and friends, it's not as sexy as you think. But yeah, so having a big part, I think about, get married if you're feeling like this is the person, and I know this is like what I think God is telling me to do, and you can do it with no money,
Mhm.
very little money, and you can have a celebration of um, the commitment over and over and over and over again. So instead of being focused on one big wedding, which I had, right? Not knocking it, it's a thing. In hindsight, I've been married twice to the same man. I did the big one, and then we did a very small one in my pastor's office, and the small one stuck. And so I would say that you don't need the big hurrah. What you need is the commitment to be committed.
Mm.
And if you have that, and you're like, okay, God, I'm trusting you. I think this is it. I think I'm hearing from you. This is my person. We're in agreement. Proceed forward. You can celebrate as you grow together over time with as many large parties as you want, which is what a wedding is, again and again and again. So I think next year we're going to be 10 years we should probably talk about this offline, because if I'm going to have a renewal, a vows, celebration, whatever, I can't imagine that I would be able to pull it off if you didn't help me plan that, because I am not a planner. So it's an idea that I have now, and I think next year we hit 10 years almost. May is when both of our anniversaries are, wedding one, marriage one, and marriage two. So we should probably plan that offline for next year. But yeah, so we can do as many celebrations as you want. You got to get in it and get through the thick of it. So 2 years in, it's going well. Talk a little bit about the bumpiness, that's the turbulence, which is a good word.
Before or
Yeah, because some people experience it before. I think yours was really unique in that you went through so much before you got married, but I think it helped you both really know you want this.
yeah, I think it was more, yeah, just like expectations of like depending on how you were raised, so like what you saw like modeled to you of like what it is, and then nothing like super crazy, but there was like some like health things going on. So then like even like we always joke that like we had even like people recently, like, we had a couple who actually was somewhat newly married, and they were asking the same questions about like, was it hard? And then like COVID happening. I'm like, oh, we had COVID in like 2019. I'm like, COVID was like a
Before
piece of
COVID.
cake for us. So
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
pandemic was like, we were chilling at that point. Like we were used to each
Mhm.
other's company. Like that was nothing.
Mhm.
So I think it was just learning each other and getting all those expectations out of like what do you expect like this person you're with, that's whatever, your girlfriend becoming your wife, like what, like the roles that like she has, and like doing, and like I'm not your mom like of like certain things that your mom does, that I remember having conversations like that where it's like, well, yeah, of course she's not going to do, like Stefan's mom being like, well, she's not your mom. So like, she doesn't need to, like, I unfortunately or not, or fortunately or unfortunately, like I have to do those things or like listen
Right.
to you. Like she doesn't need to. So
Right.
it was just so much learning. I think also like processing our own trauma in other relationships, or just like insecurities there, or carrying over those expectations.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I guess it's just a lot of like talking and a lot of really like clarifying what we expect these roles to be. Like how we were raised, what I think like worked, what didn't work. And to be completely honest, I think we did a lot of it. And I think I shared this recently. We even had a friend who asked us, actually point blank asked us that question. Zaria was already born. So we probably only like 2 months into marriage. And I don't like answering questions on the spot, which I think that's come up recurringly on this, on these our episodes. But he was like, well, no, answer it. And about like what I thought like the woman's role versus like the man's role was in a marriage. And I realized I spewed out something. And then as soon as he got off the phone, they talked for a while, and I came out to Stefan, and I'm like, I don't even believe that. Like I just said something that I think was like programmed into me,
Yeah.
but we're clearly not living that right now. And I don't believe that. So I think also having those conversations prior to, of like thinking about how you were raised, thinking about like even like what you saw modeled to you.
Mhm.
Did it work? Does it work for you? Does it work for like
Mhm.
your partner? Like, is that what you guys want to do? Because
Yep.
there's a lot more choice there. And I think we kind of just do things because it was done, and you don't realize that there's options or like that you can choose to either
Mhm.
replicate this, or like actually that it doesn't work. Or even, again, I did marriage and becoming a parent at the same time. So even like expectations then, even with like having a kid, of like, I don't know, like if it's like the woman's always like cleaning, like whatever those things are, like making sure, like one of our biggest fights, I remember when we first moved in, we weren't married yet, was like loading the dishwasher. Like it was the
Like,
dumbest
whose
thing.
responsibility was it,
No, I
and who
loaded it
wasn't doing?
wrong in his
Oh,
mind. So
okay. Yep.
like things like,
Your
I think,
husband has a touch of OCD, right? So we had to kind of work through that. I
yeah.
remember when we were like on vacation, and we had to go through your room, and I was like, we had been there for like a day, and I was like, everything is like perfect in here. How can you pull that off on vacation? But she's like, oh, no, no, no. Like, we come
Yeah.
in and everything's got to go like right where it's supposed to be.
I'm actually work. I feel I'm like, I always say I'm like, I'm clean, but I can get disorganized very quickly.
Yes.
And then I get
Same.
organized again, just with like trying.
Same.
like trying
Yep.
things out and getting ready.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Everything's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. To
Where
be where
he's very clean and very organized. Like he can't function if things. So again, even stuff like that, like
yeah.
learning those things, like it's certain things that I never thought I would do this way, but we did live together first. Again, I kind of like quote unquote broke all of the rules that I said I
All the
was never going
programming.
to. Yeah.
Hmm.
So we did do things quote unquote out of order, but the turbulence came from like learning those things. And I think to your point, Stacie, like a lot of people, if you do it quote unquote right in the order you're supposed to, you might not learn a lot of those things until you are married. So you went from having this like honeymoon or like just amazing phase of like everything's perfect and maybe even like best versions of yourself are being, I don't
No,
know,
I didn't
shown
have
to each
that.
other.
I didn't have that either. We dated way too long, but we met really young. So I think in hindsight, I don't even know what the right answer is because we met at 22, and I don't know that in your 20s you know who you are enough to really like choose a partner with wisdom, and outside of really having a good relationship with God where you know like you and I literally prayed, fasted, and heard God say trust me before I got married, and got into the marriage, and it was like all hell broke loose. So I was like, wait, what? You said trust me. I know I heard you. I prayed and I made sure I didn't turn the TV on so I could hear you, and I heard you. It was like I saw trust me almost in like, that like those neon signs
Hmm.
that you could get where you like get it made and you can plug it in and you can hang it on your wall. It was like trust me. And or maybe I thought about doing that, but so when it all fell apart, I was like, now God, we talked about this and you told me that I could trust you. Why the heck is everything falling apart? And I learned through the process and the journey that he wasn't telling me trust me because it was going to be perfect. He told me trust me because in the imperfectness of the experience that I was about to encounter, I was going to need to trust him that he was going to navigate me through it. And it was a very tumultuous journey, but he navigated me through it. And I came out on the other side with a deeper faith than I ever had, with a level of trust and faith and confidence that God is real that I did not have, and with the certainty that if he says something, I can trust it. Even if that means, and that can mean that where he's taking me, I am not going to enjoy the process, but it will be for my good. And I think it's interesting because you had a bumpy experience and, you were trying to do it some version of you are like, okay, God, let me do it this, let me follow your steps and your rules, and you're in church and you're doing the whole thing. And like, it all just fell apart for you, right? When that relationship didn't go the way you wanted. And you're like, I got to hit the reset button. And maybe it was a bit of like, I just got to go figure out how to discover how to start my life because I had just put myself on hold for so long. And then you end up in this situation. And I'm, for you guys, I'm really grateful you went through so much that you did before because you started out really strong.
Hmm.
And I don't know that when most of the dating experience is mostly puppy dogs and ice cream, you haven't been through anything. So when you get into the marriage and it starts to get really rocky and bumpy, you're like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't sign up for any of this. And what you're really signing up for is that I'm going to do life with you.
Right.
And those vows, they go from the extremes of, sickness, health, rich, poor, death, so that you understand it's the whole thing. And, I'm not an advocate for staying in anything abusive. So you can sign up for what you think is going to work and it doesn't work. And God allows for divorce and there's all these things in there and I got divorced. And so don't stay in something that is abusive or that is, more than not working. It's just like I'm doing my part and this person is not showing up in a way that is like I'm emotionally being abused, I'm mentally abused, I'm physically abused, I'm fill in the blank, right? Or there's abandonment and I'm here. And like I remember knowing the story of a woman who's like, my husband lives down the street with his girlfriend. and I'm waiting for God to restore our marriage. And I was like, come again? And if like you gotten a word and God told you that I'm here for praying and being in like, let me help believe with you, but that's abandonment, right? He has literally left you and moved on. And unless you've gotten a word from God, like God allows for divorce. But there was a tumultuousness in your beginning that I think gave you guys a real like, I was gonna say there was something when you talked about you went through a lot and you kept it a high level, but you said there was something I thought of when you were speaking. You said something about the tumultuousness, and I was thinking about how I think you guys were triggering each other
Oh my gosh, yes.
a ton.
Well,
And so, yeah, he'd step on your trigger, you'd step on his trigger, and you would just constantly like reactively reacting off of each other. You were having a lot of reactions to the triggers. What were you going to say about that?
yeah, no, it's interesting because I would say 100%, 100% triggering each other. And even now, again, like with what I'm learning and like coaching everything and like trauma responses, like I think also learn like he was very much like a fight. Like when you get, he's like ready to go. He could talk forever. Like he can debate. He can go there. He doesn't get uncomfortable. And then I very much am like flight. So we'd get into it and he's ready to go. And I'm trying to like leave the room. And he's like, wait a second. Like, and also interesting enough too about like trauma living in your body and stuff, like I immediately would go to tears and he was like, well, this isn't like that doesn't work either because now I have to comfort you, like, so I'm like,
I
I'm
want
not
to fight
doing
with you, but you're making me stop fighting to comfort you, and that's not what I want to do. So stop that crying.
it. So it was very much like he would trigger me. Oh, I'd probably do something that would trigger him. And then like
Mhm.
him being so direct would then immediately like make me like, I need to get out of this. So we did so much of that. So then it took us learning how like not trying to make each other react as the other person would, but realizing what is happening and that we are triggering each other. It sounds all beautiful. And like that took a very long time for us to realize that. But also what was crazy and which I actually never saw. So like very long story short, we moved very quickly. I will say that. But I will say there's also, and that wasn't normal for me either. Like prior to him, I'd been in like 7-year relationship. Like I'd been in very long relationships where we were like together within a month of knowing each other and probably moved in like 6-7 months in. Like we moved very quick when I like look back at it.
Mhm.
So there's part of me it's like when you know, another part of me is like that's crazy because it so much happened in such a condensed time compared to even relationships I was in for so long. But
Pause for a second. I've never had this thought. If when you moved in, you had gotten married because you like, I think this is my person. Maybe the tumultuousness that you had would have been that beginning early marriage thing that I'm
oh
talking
my
about, where it
gosh,
can
I
be
think I would
really
have been like,
bumpy.
I made like the
The
worst
worst
mistake
mistake
ever.
of my life. Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
because it would have felt very almost like it's interesting. I think it would have felt like my choice was taken away from me now at this point because it's something I believe in so much that like I like signed my life away and now again, I know the choice is there, but
Yeah.
the height, like even though it was still a big deal, I think everything would have been heightened even more. Like I think there'd been so much more pressure on it,
Yeah.
where at least it still felt like a lot of pressure. Like I up and moved, I got rid of my apartment, like I was also in his space, so like that I almost
It
don't
wasn't
recommend.
anywhere easy for you to
I almost
go.
don't recommend that. I almost more recommend like neutral space when you're moving in somewhere because that was also our argument as well. Is like, well, you're in my place, and I'm like, do not say that to me. Like, I have nowhere else to go. Like, I trusted you enough that we made this choice together. It just happens
Hmm.
to be your place, but like, it's
Hmm.
very much now like
When I
our
moved in, it became our place. Yeah.
exactly. Um,
Yeah.
and then I don't know if I should go here or not, but like I think also merging, like we're in an interracial marriage. So there was a lot of that there, like
Hmm.
a ton of that there and
Yep.
real.
Hmm.
So I don't think that's any joke either. So I think like that, but again, I think it's amazing that we went through all of that prior to getting married, prior to bringing a child into the world. Like we had a lot we had to cover and like really dig down and like I think a lot of it is like really like trusting each other and like knowing that you are again on the same team and not like when we'd go at it, like we are on the same team.
Right.
We're not enemies, but like
Mhm.
he like again with our own, I think, our own trauma, like I think we both had our
Mhm.
own like abandonment issues to a certain
Mhm.
extent. So like
Mhm.
knowing that we're into this together, that we can trust each other,
Yeah.
that he trusted me enough of like understanding like his maybe like struggles he's had or like about
Mhm.
being like a black man, and that I can all, and that's I think a thing too, like I moved into Harlem, like there was just a lot going on where I think society pressures and everything going on, that us as human beings, and then on top of it society, like race, like things going, and then if you think now that I'm thinking about it too, like going through 2020, like we went through a lot together during like heightened times as well, which I think also brought us
Closer.
together and also
Ultimately.
intimately, and also had like very
Ultimately.
all, yes,
Ultimately, it brought you together at the time that you were like bulls in a
yes,
china shop. It didn't feel like you were being brought together.
right. And then I think with like how like things that were going on, it heightened everything, but then it gave us the space, like we really had like very, I think you can to a certain extent, I'm not gonna say everyone, almost have surface level conversations, or if things aren't like, if
Mhm.
you don't personally go there, or if you don't like even talk about those things, where some of it was, I think both of our personalities, we kind of go there either, but he definitely goes like he likes deep conversations. So we had a lot of the hard stuff up front, like where I was like,
Yeah.
I've dated outside my race before, and I'm like, I've never had these conversations to like
Right.
this
Right.
degree, but I'm
Mhm.
very grateful that we did and like worked through a lot of that. So I think, yes, lots of conversations about that, lots of conversation about like parenting, bringing a child in the world that's going to be mixed and like have both of these parts of us, and like just how society can view them. But the one thing I wanted to say was what was crazy. So like we broke all of that to say, like I broke up with him very quickly, where I was like, I'm not doing this. Um,
Done.
and then we got back together though. And when I say I've never seen someone change so quickly, where I was like, that was nice, but like, let's see.
If
Like, we
it's
had a
real.
nice dinner, and I'm like, we'll see how long this lasts. Like, yes, I'll give you another chance. But like, when I say he changed, like, he changed. So then it was very much after that, I was then reacting to old stuff. So I feel like then
Mhm.
he was triggering. Well, I don't even think he was triggering me. I think I was just reacting to how I felt prior to, even though he did
Mhm.
change. So then it was like switched, and it's like now Eden has a lot of work to do. Work to do.
And to be clear, right, Steph was more boisterous in his demonstration of his expression of himself, I'll
Yes.
say. And then when that didn't work for you and you left, and then he was like, wait a minute, wait, what am I doing? And I remember he was like in his Bible, like he was like, I like change me, renew my mind. Like he was like, I need to get to where like I it's odd because I think in hindsight you could see how there were these things that you both did that you'd never done that showed you you realized on some level, probably subconsciously, like I found my person, but I don't know how to handle my person
Yes.
and who I am with my person because this is so radically different than anything I've ever experienced before. I don't know how to do this. And so it was probably all kinds of ways of disorienting to both of you. But then he immediately kind of pivoted. And then next thing you know, was like, you became like the
Yeah.
heightened expression person. And you were like, at one point, stuff was like, I'm kind of scared of her. And I was like, yeah, so it's very interesting how you guys went through this whole, but it's interesting because I think probably in hindsight now that I look at it, you knew this was your person. You probably could have gotten married then and all this bumpiness would have happened in the marriage. It's a unique situation, I think, that you went through so much before because usually it's very courting and fluffy and, you know, not necessarily all that tumultuousness. But I have this question and this thought, and then I think we're hitting up against our part one. We're gonna pause and come back. But when did you know that you were like, I want to marry him? I don't know why I have this question, but and I think I've asked you this before, but I do not remember the answer. So when did you know?
It's interesting because I don't like, he says he knew right away, which I believe him now. At times I question it. I was like, because we had so many issues like with
Right.
certain
How did you
things.
know? Right.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
I will say I knew very early on, which was weird. The exact moment, I don't know if I can say the exact moment, but I don't think I've ever felt so seen, which is
I
weird.
knew you were gonna say
Like,
that word. I knew you were gonna say that
yeah,
word. I was like, it's seen.
yeah,
It's seen, it's seen, it's seen. And I remember it's your wedding song.
yeah.
It's the song that you chose to walk down the aisle
Oh,
to.
yeah, so yeah,
And
it's not our song, but it's the song we woke. Yeah.
the song you walked down the aisle to was I forget the lyrics, but it's something about I love you because of the way you love me.
Hmm.
Is it like am I saying that right? I feel like
I have to
it's
hear.
I'm escaping it right now. It's because it's in my love song playlist, so it comes up all the time. Whenever I hear it, I immediately see you walking down the aisle. But I think the words are the artist is Major,
Yes.
and the words are something about I love you because of the way you love me. And so I just knew it was seen. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were gonna say you never felt so seen.
Yeah, like I even remember like the day I met him, which I did not know was going to go this direction. Like already there, I was like, okay, like I don't think this would be like a romantic thing, but we like connected like immediately, like finishing each other's sentences, like talking over people of like just I like was vibrant, like I understood what he was saying. Where I'm like just shaking my head, I'm like, yeah, absolutely, we could go back and forth. Uh, that and then also like seen, but then also like of yeah, seen, and I don't even know if it's interesting because I don't know if like until having a child where I'd be like, oh, I understand like unconditional love, but like I of having my own, I think fears around like okay, people can come into your life, but are they going to stay? Where like even though when he threatened it, like when we would get in arguments and before we worked through stuff of like leaving, of like, well, this is my place, like you got to get out of here. Like I at the
You
same
said
time
that or he said that?
that was his big thing
Yeah.
in the beginning when I first moved in, but like where I knew A, I didn't believe him, and B, like
He
safe,
wasn't
like it,
convincing with the threat.
no, like seen, and I think also like safe, where I was like, he 100% like has my back, and I, yeah, like I can't say I've ever in any other relationship, I think like felt that way. So
That's pretty powerful considering
yeah,
you were in a relationship for 7 years.
right,
I
yeah.
feel seen or safe. We
Well,
can
like
have a
I mean,
whole separate
completely,
conversation.
where there
Yeah,
wasn't like
yeah, no, I get it. No, you don't have to editorialize. I got
yeah.
it. Like it's like a thing where I'm doing work that I shouldn't have to do.
Doing Rich Neptune, I will say, I think for him too, he's very good at speaking and he communicates, which I wasn't used to men who actually like shared the emotions, shared their feelings, like didn't leave you like in your head. Where before that, I was always like, what is going on in there? And
Leaving you on
I,
red.
yeah, where like I was at times the person who needed people to pull emotions out of me. So like
Yeah.
to have to be the person to pry it out of others, where like he was giving that to me, where I'm like, I know where he's at all times. I still should. I had to then be better at asking questions myself. But yeah, so I would say that.
It's weird. We started with the mystery of marriage and we're talking about so much about your relationship pre-marriage, which is fascinating. Because I thought we were gonna go into the whole marriage space. But all of that I say was probably like foundational work that you did that helped you have a solid first 2 years. Because you did a lot of that work. I think the 3 years before, three and change, was it
Yeah.
before you got married?
Mhm.
Um, there was so much that got packed into that time. It probably felt longer.
Yeah.
I definitely, when I think about you guys being together, it doesn't feel like it's been 5 years and change. It feels like you've been around forever. So, it's a very interesting dynamic. I hope what we're talking about regarding just unpacking some of what can happen in relationship and maybe what it looks like to be in something that is can be turbulent and yet producing some measure of fruit. I guess I would say is there was some fruit that was coming through in the relationship as far as figuring out you didn't run away. You wanted to, and you probably physically did a bit at times, but you came back and you kept coming back, and he figured out how to give you space so that when you did need to fly, you both kind of were like, Yeah, like I'm not actually really going anywhere. And he's like, she'll be back. And so there was like a way to figure out how to do the fight or flight in a healthier way. And you went through some of that and it gave you a great foundation. And I will say that in that season where he was struggling with his health, you showed up and you held you guys down and you really did. I remember it was the part where you're like, I literally have to do everything because physically he can't do anything. And you weathered through the hard part and it gave you a really good, strong foundation. So when we come back, we'll talk more about the mystery of marriage and maybe touch more on the marriage part. But hopefully some of this was helpful, because if you're in a spot where maybe it feels harder than it feels like it should be, either pre or post marriage, and yet you sense there's something there and you think this person is worth it. I definitely had that experience myself where I was like, Zach, some parts of this are harder than it should be, even in the dating part, but I sense this is my person. It can be really challenging and it can take you to places and spaces that you never thought you would be in. And yet you can find a lot of beauty in the ashes of what you worked through. So come back for part 2 so we can talk more about the mystery of marriage. And thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Remember to unlock your queen
And unleash her dreams.